Hello, my name is Reginae Edwards. Welcome to Kicking the Habit. Today we are going to explore the triggers that surround smoking. We'll hear from some former smokers and follow their journey. You may wonder why it's important to know your triggers, but triggers are something that kind of puts you into autopilot and you kind of go along the most commonly walked path. Let me explain it like this. Have you ever been driving and you're just kind of daydreaming, and before you know it, you look up and you're at your destination, you don't even remember how you got there? That's because your mind kind of went on autopilot, and without even thinking about it, you have driven that path to work, to church, or wherever so much, you just automatically go on that path. Triggers are kind of like that. Sometimes something happens throughout the day, whether it's just waking up that morning or just getting in the car, whatever it may be, and before you know it, you've smoked half a cigarette, you're not even sure when you lit it or when the person has lit it. I think of all the stories of people that I've worked with, and one whole week we work on discovering triggers, being aware of triggers before they even attempt to quit. And so what they'll do is they'll pick out one trigger. Like for one instance, a person said, every time I get in the car, I light up and I smoke. And so in his week of just trial and error, before he actually planned to quit, he wanted to just see, how can I get through that trigger of getting in the car and not lighting up a cigarette? So what he did was he put all the cigarettes and everything he needed for lighting up in the trunk of his car so that he couldn't automatically pick up the cigarette and smoke it. He would have to stop his car, pull over to the side, get out, go to the trunk, and actually light up and do the cigarette, smoke the cigarette. So that was something that kind of got him out of his routine. So it's very important that if you are thinking about quitting, to just take some time before you even plan to quit. Take some time to really explore what your triggers are. And what we did with our participants is that we had them put a little slip of paper that actually fit in their cigarette holder. And they would, every time they took a cigarette out, they would put their mood, they would put why they smoked, and they would put how they felt afterwards, just so that they can get an idea of why they were triggered to smoke. Now, we've asked our former smokers some questions so that we can kind of explore what their routine was about. And as we ask them these questions, I want you to ask these questions to yourself so that you can start to explore what your triggers are. The first question that we asked our participants: what was your daily smoking routine? Let's listen to those responses.
Well, initially, when I started smoking the pipe, it was just something to do. So as long as I had some pipe tobacco, I would smoke, and it wasn't really a big habit. When I went to cigars, it was, catch as catch can. Didn't really smoke that much. But once I picked up smoking cigarettes, I smoked, like I said, it was over in the service when I was in Vietnam. So I smoked it a lot. It was just when I got up, I smoked and smoked throughout the day.
Well, my daily smoking routine was I get up in the morning, I'd light a cigarette, and all through the day, I am smoking one behind the other. I just smoked all day.
When I smoked on a very regular basis. I smoked in the morning when I woke up. I smoked after every meal. I smoked before I went to sleep. And I found excuses to smoke in between that time.
Now you've heard those responses. The ladies differed somewhat from our gentlemen there, but their answers were very much the same. They basically smoked when they first woke up in the morning, and they smoked basically all throughout the day and right before they went to bed. Isaac, on the other hand, he said he kind of just smoked when it was around. That's interesting, and we're going to go into why that's interesting a little bit later in this program. But again, you want to take note of that, because now they realize that they smoke when they first wake up in the morning. Kathleen realized that she smoked after every single meal. So now that she has that as a routine, that's just her remote path to follow, she's going to have to start considering that and making new paths. So the more, again, the more that you discover this routine, the more successful you'll be at trying to break that routine. Let's move on to the next question. Again, make sure that you're asking this question to yourself and you're answering this and you're just getting as deep as possible, because the more you know about your routine, the more successful that you're going to be in breaking that routine. The next question that we asked our participants: when and why did you have extra cigarettes outside of this routine? Let's see what they had to say.
Well, smoking was a social experience. We're going back 40 years ago, and smoking was more of a social experience then. And so if you had cigarettes, I had cigarettes. If I had cigarettes, you had cigarettes. So it was a thing that they were shared.
I had extra cigarettes outside of my normal routine when I was involved with other people. For instance, if I was at a party, then it was community property. Everybody was smoking, so that was extra. If I just happened to be just in the company of somebody else and we just smoked, that was the thing to do. We just smoked.
And when I smoked, in between all throughout the day, it was always because somebody else was smoking that I was talking to, or because I was stressed out, or because I was happy. There's just always a good reason to smoke a cigarette.
Okay, so they gave some explanation as to why they smoked cigarettes outside of their normal routine. And you heard what the lady said, that there was basically any reason was a good reason to smoke an extra cigarette. I really want to pay close attention to what Brenda said. She said parties, social settings. If somebody else was smoking, that was what she was going to do. And Isaac mentioned that too, that if somebody else was going to light up, they were going to light up too. It's just kind of a social connectedness there. I remember once working with a group, because sometimes I would do a class that was just for one particular business or one particular organization. And this was actually a medical clinic, a medical facility where quite a few of the healthcare professionals were, believe it or not, smokers. And a lot of the women under the age of 30 in this particular clinic, they were like 1 or 2 a day cigarette smokers, and they smoked a lot on the weekend at parties and with their friends. In talking with some of our more experienced tobacco cessation specialists, they were saying that oftentimes these individuals aren't necessarily addicted to the nicotine per se, because usually you'll want that when the nicotine wears off, but just smoking 1 or 2 a day isn't necessarily a nicotine addiction. But they were really addicted to that camaraderie, and their friends and that social setting that they were in encouraged the smoking. So if this is where they had their fun, then that was something that they had to consider as their trigger. How are they going to overcome these triggers? Because these are their friends. This is what they do for fun on the weekend. Do they want to take away their fun? These are things that they have to consider and have new ways of having fun. And trying to break that routine on the weekend is definitely something that, if that is something you struggle with, you want to consider as well. Let's look at the next question. What I asked them was, did you mostly smoke alone or with others? Let's listen to hear.
Equally the same. Smoked just as much by myself or with other folk. Just pretty much equal.
I smoked not only alone, I smoked with others, and more so with others. When I was in the company of other people, I smoked more.
I smoked regardless of who I was around. I always would, sneak off if there was people around me who didn't smoke, but when there were people around me who did partake in cigarettes, it just made it all the more easier to chain smoke and smoke a lot of cigarettes.
Now we've heard their responses. The question was, did they mostly smoke alone or with others? It seemed like they smoked alone or with others, but some smoked more with others. Interesting. So again, if that's something that you do, you want to really consider if maybe having a different group of friends, hanging around people that are non-smokers, which is very difficult because where you work, I've known, like I said, whole workplaces where they all smoke together. It's just something they do on their break. I know people, health professionals, that started smoking because their fellow nurses smoked as well. So that can be very difficult, but having a group of friends that are non-smokers can be very beneficial. And then I just want to touch on this a little bit. I remember a time where I was with a young lady and we were at a function where you couldn't smoke. And I remember sitting there with her and her just, looking kind of agitated, and I really didn't know why. Eventually she got up and she just walked out, and I was concerned about her, so I went to look for her. I couldn't find her, and I walked all the way to the car because we came together, and I remember as I was walking back to the building where we were staying, she was kind of on the side of the building putting out the cigarette and just trying to get the smoke away. And I was like, I didn't want her to be embarrassed, so I just quickly rushed in and didn't make a big deal about it. She comes in, she smells like smoke. She probably doesn't think anyone notices. But I thought about that, like how hard must it be to be a kind of undercover smoker, so to speak, because I didn't even know she smoked. And I knew her very well. It must be difficult because she has to now be thinking about it when she's with people who don't smoke, and then she has to go and sneak away. And I can think of other stories that are very similar of people just kind of having to hide, and that's got to be very stressful to have to deal with that. So, that's also something that's a benefit. When somebody becomes a non-smoker who's a smoker, that's kind of a stressful situation that you get to come out of. Another thing that I wanted to mention as we're looking at smoking alone or with others, a lot of times people who are smokers, and this is something I want to make sure everyone understands, most people who smoke don't want to smoke. If they could quit, if there was something that was super easy that they could do that could help them to stop quitting, boom, just like that, they would quit. So again, we want to have sympathy for those who are smoking because we have to realize that they most likely want to quit. Now, if you have friends that smoke and you don't want to be the downer, you don't want to be the one that's the sore thumb, as Isaac said, that is not the one smoking, talk to your friends. Let them know, hey, I'd like to quit smoking. If you want to quit with me, that's fine. If not, would you mind not smoking around me and not lighting up around me, not even offering it to me? And I found that people who have friends that smoke, a lot of them are very encouraging, and they are very cautious about not smoking around their friends who want to become non-smokers, not offering them anything. So you'll be surprised. And if you quit smoking and your smoking friends may even be encouraged to quit smoking with you. So just ask. Don't assume that they'll be upset with you. Now, we asked them this next question, which is, did you use smoking to deal with stress? Now, let's hear their responses and listen carefully.
Smoking was a thing that I did when I was stressed. Smoking was a thing that I did when I felt good. Smoking was a thing that I did no matter what I was feeling. It was just what I did.
Smoking was like a really big comfort to me when I was stressed or when I was angry or when I was depressed. It always seemed to take away the emotion I did not want to feel, or at least relieve it.
I don't know if I smoked to deal with stress per se. I smoked because it was the thing to do.
Now you heard those responses. The question was, did you use smoking to deal with stress? Now, Isaac basically went back to it just being a social thing. It's just something to do. And you heard the ladies. They basically said that they smoke no matter what. Yes, they smoke to deal with stress. They smoke to deal with everything. Whatever it was, smoking relieved that situation. And I want to take a moment here because this is something that I have seen over and over and over with male versus females. When we get, males and females coming into our classes, what you hear Brenda and Kathleen saying is very typical. And this is just something I thought of in my mind, and when we would have our meetings as facilitators, we would discuss. It's interesting that women tend to be a bit more relational in that smoking was something you did if you were upset, if you were depressed, if you were stressed. But if you were happy, if you were excited, it was just something that you did. I mean, it was like your best friend, like it was a part of you. Where for males, it was like they had this smoking box. Smoking was just something that they did, and it was independent of everything else in their lives. So they were compartmental with their smoking and the cigarette, whereas women seem to be more relational. It really related to everything in their lives. And this is an encouragement for males. I find that once a male was ready to quit, they could quit. But, their wives couldn't nag them and force them, hey, honey, you really need to quit. You got to quit. I mean, if they weren't ready, and they weren't going to quit. Whereas for females, they could be very ready, they could be very serious, but because of the relations that they had from cigarettes and everything else, it seemed to be a little bit more, not as simple as how the guys could just put it in the box, close it, and throw it away, and it was done. And not to be discouraging for the females, but what this does bring out is that, again, we have to look at these triggers. For females, we just might have more triggers that we need to consider. Again, looking at your need, the need of your family member or whoever it is that's smoking, to really look at those triggers and make a game plan for how you're going to tackle that. Now, the next question that we ask is, how well did it work? What were the benefits? And I know that sounds like a silly question, but the reality is there are some benefits to smoking, or else a person wouldn't start and they wouldn't continue to do it. There must be some relief that they're getting. So let's listen to that answer. What are the benefits of smoking?
Well, as far as just smoking to smoke, it worked because everybody else was smoking. So if you didn't smoke, you pretty much were, like a sore thumb hanging out, and, you did not mix. Not that there was a stress that, I wasn't really worried about fitting in, but it was something that I did, not because of the crowd that I was with. It was just what I was doing, and everybody else did the same thing. Birds of a feather flock together.
It's kind of crazy how you let yourself believe something is changing something when it really isn't. It was a disguise to it was a disguise. I felt like I was feeling better, but then after the cigarette went away, I was still left with the same problem. Nothing ever really changed except for the fact that I had an addiction on top of everything else.
The benefits of smoking. As a smoker, it's just something to do with your hands. It's relieving that craving that the nicotine brings. It was making you feel better because you are satisfying the hunger for the smoke.
Okay, so you heard the benefits of smoking. Now, Isaac, again, he talked about the social setting and the social connectedness that he found in being a smoker. And you heard again from the ladies, I really want to bring out Kathleen's point. I thought that was very interesting. She said she thought she was feeling better, but nothing really changed, except that on top of all these problems, she was also now dealing with the struggles of being a smoker and wanting to quit. Brenda, she said it's something to do with the hands. I thought that was interesting. It also relieved the craving. I like that she brought that up because when we facilitate quit smoking classes, we give them a little survival pack when it's time for them to quit. And one thing that we put in the survival pack is a pencil or a straw or something, because it's actually, they're used to doing something with their hands, bring it to their mouth. And when they have something that they can just do with their hands, it can actually distract them from wanting to basically breaking that routine. Again, we're talking about triggers. So again, we want to look at all of these perceived benefits that you might be getting when you're smoking, so that you can now find healthier alternatives, healthier ways, healthier routines of living. Now, what I want you to do is, if you're a smoker, if you smoke and you have not thought about what triggers you to smoke, I want you to, as a homework assignment, get a piece of paper. I want you to write down a list of everything that triggers you to smoke. Again, if you want to do the little card that I was talking about earlier in the program, where you have a piece of paper folded up, put into the pack of cigarettes, and every time you take out your cigarettes and you're going to light one up, I want you to write down why you're doing that cigarette. What was the trigger? Whether it was just waking up in the morning, whether it was right after you ate, whether somebody made you mad. You want to write those things down, because what we're going to do when we talk about planning to quit in the next segment, you're going to start making game plans for how to change those routines, how to either avoid those triggers or turn those triggers around to now trigger something else that's a more positive behavior. It makes me think of a couple of different stories. One of my stories is, I remember one time I was out of the country actually, and there was a young man who said that he had quit smoking, and in place of smoking, he started exercising. So every time he got the urge, he would exercise, and he became he was just Mr. Buff, you know? And we were, again, in a different country, and he wanted to get to the gym. And there was one day where he couldn't get to the gym. I remember he was so agitated. He was just like, I need to get to the gym. I need to get to the gym. And it was just so interesting how he had basically substituted that urge to smoke with the urge to go to the gym, and was almost having similar withdrawal effects or anxiety attack because he couldn't get out to the gym. I think also of another lady who was in our class, and she was saying that she was doing very, very well. She had quit smoking, and her daughter moved back into her house. It was an adult daughter that moved back into the house, and her daughter drove her nuts. And she said to me, Regine, if I didn't smoke a cigarette, I was going to kill her. And I just laughed. I said, come on. She says, no, really. She said, so it's either I kill her or I smoke that cigarette. Now, I don't think she was really going to kill her daughter. I hope not. But sometimes it can seem that drastic, and that was a trigger for her, and she began to smoke again because of that. And so, we want to make sure that when situations like that happen, we have a game plan. But we don't know to even make a game plan if we don't recognize what our triggers are. So that, again, is why it's very important to have an understanding of what our triggers are, so we can make a game plan so it doesn't surprise us and we go into remote and autopilot, and then we just automatically start smoking the cigarette, and before we know it, half of it is done and we don't even know how it got into our mouth. That is another reason why it's okay if you are not successful at your first attempt, second attempt, third, fourth, fifth, even sixth or seventh. The average amount of times of quitting is 7. So if you have tried that many times, don't feel like you have failed. That is where you have learned a new trigger that you might not have recognized before. So what I want you to do is, if you are just doing so well, and then something happens and you relapse, make a mistake, and you take a cigarette, take that moment to write down, this is a trigger that I didn't recognize before. Once you do that, you are more likely to be successful the next time, because now you have identified a trigger that you didn't know before. So, again, triggers are very important. You don't want to wake up one morning and just say, today's the day I'm going to quit, though it has worked for people. So don't get me wrong. If it works for you, that's fine. But if you have tried that before and it didn't work, I want you to try that this time. And another thing that I want to mention, since we're doing this program, is that sometimes just thinking about not smoking or smoking, basically our thoughts in general, can be a trigger. Now, these are deeper triggers. We're talking about our self-talk, the triggers that are going on within our mind. Thoughts like, I can't imagine being a non-smoker. Thoughts like, oh, it's the end of the day, I deserve a cigarette. Thoughts like those can be triggers as well. So those are a little bit harder to pinpoint sometimes because it's not something that you're doing or not doing, and it's not necessarily part of your day-to-day routine on the outside, but on the inside, we have a lot of these different thoughts going into our mind. So how do we deal with that? One thing that I want you to do as well as you're doing your list of triggers, start paying more attention to your self-talk. Start paying attention to what you're thinking to yourself before you have that cigarette. Is it that, oh, this will be the last one? If there's any excuses that you're making for yourself, oh, I know so many people who, Grandpa, he smoked his whole life and he lived a long life. And I know people who never smoked and they died of, X, Y, and Z. Think about those things. And now that you, as a human being, you actually have the ability to think about what you're thinking. And that's something that nothing else on earth really has the ability to do. So I want you to start thinking about what you're thinking so that you can combat those negative self-talk thoughts in your mind, because those can be triggers as well. Write those down. Start making more correct statements in response to that self-talk. But it's kind of hard to know, Lord, what should I be thinking? How do I know exactly what is true and what is not? And different people tell you different things. And what I want to leave you with today is we want to really commit that to the Lord and have the thoughts that He wants us to think. It reminds me of a scripture. This is found in Proverbs 16 and verse 3. And it reads, "Commit thy works unto the Lord, and thy thoughts shall be established." It's such therapy, and I say therapy maybe loosely because I am no therapist, I'm not a psychologist, but with our negative thoughts, with our thoughts that we're not sure if they're accurate, we want to compare that to what we have here in the Word of God. And one thing that I know has worked for a lot of people is just actually committing Scripture to memory, committing new thoughts, positive thoughts to memory. And that can no longer has to be a trigger for you. So let's consider our triggers and ways to overcome.